Welcome to the condensed video version of the Ph.D. webinar on articles versus the Kappe, different audiences, different purposes. This webinar is based predominantly off of the book Strategies for Writing a Thesis by Publication in the Social Sciences and Humanities, and if you come from the social sciences, I would highly recommend purchasing a copy of this book. However, if you are working in the STEM fields and natural sciences, I would recommend the book Delivering a Thesis by Publication by Dr. Jennifer Rowland for more information on how to move through your article and copywriting process. This webinar is really designed to explore the differences but also the interconnections between the articles that we have to write and the final Kappe in which they will be contained in. And there's a combination of being able to separate your research into indivisible articles and manuscripts that you will write for publication, but there's also a need to be able to compile all of these ideas from your articles as well as your original research design into a single unified document that's also a cohesive narrative. And what we mean by that is your Kappe. And writing your Kappe is really a bit of the ability to strike a balancing act between two different forms of writing for two different audiences. And when we actually look at articles versus our Kappes, we can identify a couple of main ways of understanding the purpose and the audience for these sorts of writings that we're going to do. The first difference is that articles really try to separate our research and our research questions into what we could consider to be publishable chunks. Whereas the purpose of our Kappe is to unify our research manuscripts into a cohesive narrative. Articles are designed to present research with standalone significance, whereas we can think about our Kappe as presenting a portfolio of research that contributes to our larger research project. Articles have a focus on specific research topics and a specific research question, whereas a Kappe really focuses on your ability to demonstrate doctorateness in your writing. Articles are generally written for other researchers who are reading peer-reviewed journals, whereas Kappes are written for a very specific audience, the examination committee. Now, a lot of people think that it's rather easy to move through the writing process and it's easy to divide writing article manuscripts in the Kappe because our expectation of our PhD progress and our writing is as such. However, there isn't necessarily a linear progression from writing one article to the next and finishing with your Kappe. And one of the major problems with this idea is that many PhDs leave too little time to actually write their Kappe. In reality, we can actually understand the writing process more like this, where there is a significant amount of overlap in time and in actual writing, where you need to be able to balance between writing multiple different articles at different stages of writing or even review, while developing your Kappe or the narrative that is going to tie all of these different manuscripts together. Having some productive writing habits is a good way for us to be able to strike a better balance between writing various different articles at different stages of publication or review and developing our Kappe. And one of the first effective writing habits is simply to try to write a little bit every day. Be it at the end of your day for 20 or 30 minutes just to order your thoughts, or to intersperse writing throughout everything that you are doing during the day. A really great habit is also to keep all of this writing in one place, be it a research journal or a diary or a very well-organized literature notes page where you're including your own thoughts and ideas as well. Because writing every day and compiling all of those ideas in one place will make it easier for you to understand the interconnections between the research you're doing, its connection to other people's research, as well as how you'll be able to break apart each of your research questions into a manuscript that could form an individual article, while also understanding how each of those individual articles can connect together to the larger Kappe. So, while we should understand that our article manuscripts and our Kappe need to be interlinked, at the same time, it's important that we're able to break them apart and understand the different purpose and the different audience that each type of writing holds. And one effective way for us to do that is to actually focus on what we call the 4 big questions. These aren't overly difficult. In fact, they're incredibly simple. The first big question is simply what? The next is why? Third is how, and last is who. Now, how can these questions actually be valuable for us to understand our writing's purpose and audience? Well, by expanding upon them a little bit, we can ask a simple question such as, what is our research topic and the problem or the puzzle or the gap that we are really trying to communicate? And if we're able to answer this question, we identify the purpose of our research writing. Then we can ask, why is our research important to solve a problem, piece together a puzzle, or fill a gap? And if we can answer that question related to our purpose, we form a justification for our writing. Then we can ask ourselves, how have we conducted our research and how do we want to present our research? By asking this question, it helps to inform us about the format and the style that our writing is going to take. And lastly, by asking who should care or who will benefit from reading about our research, it's easier for us to identify a specific audience. So let's look at how we can identify the article's purpose first. One major problem that many PhDs face is they try to write what you could consider to be a mini monograph, where they try to take all of their ideas, all of their research questions, and cram it into a single article. And many of these articles end up being rejected because they don't have a clear, singular purpose for the peer reviewers to really understand. So it's very important for us to think about, when identifying our article's purpose, is to realize that the purpose of an article is to have a single central focus. A good way that we can approach developing our article's purpose is to try to limit each article that we want to write to a single research question with a single identifiable purpose and justification. If we have research with multiple research questions, we might want to figure out how each question is independent from each other. Additionally, it's very important that not only do we have a single question, but we have an answer to that research question before we start writing our article. And not only should we have the answer to that question or a conclusion to our research, but we also need to think about how we're going to introduce this research to our audience. So it is quite helpful to know what is your purpose, what is your justification, and how you want to produce writing that is going to be informative for a very particular audience. And knowing who your audience is a great way to help you get from introducing your question in your introduction to your goal of the big idea that you have at the end of your manuscript. So identifying our audience becomes quite important for articles because different journals have different types of audiences. And not only if we can identify who we're writing for, we can also try to figure out, based on the journals we want to publish in, the type of format that we can be expected to write in. So if we write for specialists, we'll need to write differently than if we write for generalists. And if we write for journals that predominantly want original, primary, empirical research, we need to write within that type of format. We can also think about peer-reviewed journals and articles as being part of a scientific conversation. Quite similar to an online forum or social media group, these journals and the articles contained within them are conversational communities of particular interests where people want to share and discuss certain ideas and information around those interests. Knowing what those conversational communities are help us to identify the audience, the different perspectives on the discipline, and the different expectations for what needs to be included in the type of article that we want to write. So, some quick tips for finding the right audience for your article. We can simply think about what journal we would like to publish in based on the audience and the conversation that we want to participate in. We can already start to figure out some easy ways of identifying this by thinking about where we're pulling citations and references from, which conversations are we already engaged in from the literature and reading that we're doing, and who is going to benefit from reading your research and why. We also want to choose journals that are going to support our research format. So how have we conducted our research, and what journals are going to accept articles in the format that we expect to write in? So if we plan on doing a case study or a literature review, a meta-analysis, if you plan on doing a methods review, if you plan on doing an empirical primary research article, you need to identify audiences and the journals where those types of articles are actually supported. We also want to consider where each research question is going to best fit the conversation. We might need to shop around and expect that some of our different manuscripts are going to get published in different journals because our research questions are pursuing different ideas. And of course, it's important to critically read to determine the journal's conventions. What is expected by articles that are published within a particular journal? How are research questions posed? How are introductions and conclusions developed and written? What is the common style of writing? What is the common guidelines that an author also needs to follow? However, now that we have a good understanding of articles, their purpose, and their audiences, we shift over to the Kappe, and we need to first realize that we are not going to be engaged in a scientific conversation in the same way, because a Kappe's audience is quite different, and therefore our purpose must also be different. So, who is the audience for our Kappe? Well, unlike a peer-reviewed journal, which are considered conversational spaces in science, the Kappe's audience is primarily a pedagogical one, the evaluation committee who is going to determine that you have been able to successfully contribute value and meaning in the field of study, as well as that you have successfully completed all aspects of your Ph.D. education. A Kappe is largely a demonstration of your ability to reflect and show your own learning process and sustain an argument for your research in a single comprehensive and cohesive document. And this audience is quite different, so we need to know what they're expecting to understand the purpose of our Kappe. A Kappe's purpose is ultimately to demonstrate doctorateness. I'm not going to go into great detail, and in the upcoming webinar that we'll have, we'll go further into what doctorateness is and how we can achieve it. But basically, a quality Kappe is able to demonstrate that you have publishable research. You've been able to produce manuscripts that are of good enough quality to be considered for publication or even published. You also want to demonstrate disciplinary relevance, that your research is valuable to the discipline that you study in, and that you can demonstrate mastery of the disciplinary methods and theories of the field. You also want to be able to demonstrate that your research is in some way original, and that you have also been independent in your ability to conduct the research. Lastly, a narrative should be cohesive, demonstrating connection between articles and the larger research project, or what we could consider the narrative. I think at this point it's valuable to think about the Kappe's narrative from the PhD progression and how a Kappe is interconnected with your different articles. If each article is a standalone piece of research, your Kappe needs to be able to demonstrate the connections between each of these pieces of research. And the progression of your Kappe occurs throughout the entire PhD process. It is this ongoing process of identifying, learning, and reflecting on your research and how each article builds towards the contribution that you're going to leave for your field. It's a demonstration of your ability to reflect and learn through the process of your PhD, from research, reading, to writing, as well as your ability to sustain a scientific argument for all of the articles that you have done and the contribution that they are going to leave for your field. There are a few quick ideas that I can leave you with to give you an understanding of how we can develop a narrative for our Kappe. The first thing that we can do is develop a method of tracking various aspects of our research process. This includes tracking any changes in our research decisions, our design, our methods, and any questions that we may have, any new questions that might arise in the process of researching, tracking any changes in your understanding and application of theories or concepts to really include and understand how your idea of these theories and concepts have changed over time. Any changes in your research expectations from where you started and where you ended, and what you think your understanding to the disciplinary field is through your contribution, as well as your overall understanding of the field that you find yourself in. A good way to also develop interlinkages between your standalone manuscripts is to develop a visual demonstration of research cohesion. How is it that each piece of writing that you do for an article manuscript is somehow connected to the larger idea of what you are researching? The image here shows a form of mind mapping, connections from one central theme to standalone manuscripts. However, you might prefer to visualize your research as interlinking puzzle pieces to try to understand what you have contributed, but also what might be left unanswered in your research. Perhaps your research is better represented through a form of sequential progression, that by answering one research question in one manuscript, it leads towards being able to answer another question, so on and so forth, which develops a large and sequential progression of your research that can be tied together into a kappe, or many other forms of visualization. The important idea is that you understand the connections between all components of your research to be able to formulate a quality narrative for your kappe to tie everything together in a single, comprehensive, and cohesive document.